Lyle, I've had an opportunity to hear you speak quite a lot about core values and so many different things that are behind the positive attitude development group. Tell me how it is that you got so focused on core values and this became such a big part of your life.
All right. So it started, well, let me tell you backwards, okay?
Sure.
When I went to state prison, I thought if I went to prison, I could learn how to be smarter, slicker, and smoother. And when I get out, I could be a better criminal and I wouldn't get caught.
How'd that work for you?
Not so good. So I got out and I realized I was smarter, slicker, and stupider, and I got caught quicker than I did the first 43 years of my life. And so I went to prison then in the federal system, and I went to work at the chapel. And so I watched people commit their lives to a prophet or to a savior or to some religious beliefs, and they thought that that would keep them safe out in the system. And so I thought, well, that's a nice idea. They would go out, and within 9 months, they were back in prison. So then I was teaching a class, positive attitude class, and I thought, if you guys just keep a positive attitude and do the right thing, you won't come back, you'll stay out. And so they would all leave with a positive attitude. And then within a year, they were back. And so I'm thinking, so coming to prison, getting smarter, slicker, and smoother, committing yourself to some organization, and then having a positive attitude, none of those seem to work. So what keeps us out of prison? For those who succeed, what is it that keeps them out?
That sounds like a really good question.
And so I started to write to the guys leaving. And so over my incarceration, I wrote to about 400 men. And so the ones that I really followed are the ones that were successful. The ones that came back had the same stories. And so the ones that were out and they were successful, they would keep telling me about how they were focused, how they had to say yes to some things and no to other things. And I started to ask, what would make that up? And so I started to do some research on the guys in the groups with me, and we started to talk about what would it be that would drive our lives like a rudder that would keep us out of prison. And so, you know, the cognitive programs would say it's critical thinking. Some people would say it's your beliefs. And I always thought they didn't get to the root of it. Even going to the beliefs, they never got to the root of it. And so what would be the root? And so I concluded that the root is that we all have learned some values. And those values drive our lives. So for example, if I value a job, and if I value a family, my belief is that family is important. I have to make a commitment to the family. If I get a job, I want to work to help the person with the job reach their goals. And so the beliefs started to support these values. And I thought, how do I identify the values that are behind the beliefs? Because all cognitive programs are talking about beliefs. So one day I was talking with the guys, and so we started to talk about the neurology of our brains. And so if you could just picture, your brain doesn't know its values. It only has a neurological network that drives the behavior. So my conclusion is, the brain's the organ of our behavior.
Okay.
And the brain is value driven, and it doesn't know how to name those values. Until we can name them and identify them, we can't decide or see the effects they're having on our lives. So I started asking people, what did you do when you came back? And they would always say, man, I got in an argument, you know, and I tried to do this and do that. But the people who stayed out, they always told me, I gave up the belief that I was more important than anything else. I started to believe that the relationship I was in was more important than my personal interest. And I go, maybe that's it right there. So how do I define those? And so I started to write down all the words the guys said they valued when they left. And so all the people who left, I wrote those words down, and they started to be like compassion and understanding and love and forgiveness. And what were the words that people said they valued when they came back? Greed, me, instant gratification, wanting to get high. And so I thought, okay, we have core values that keep us out there, and then we have core values that bring us back. And so I started to see this connection building.
Okay, yeah.
And so I had guys actually go through the process in prison with only 20 cards. And they would say, well, this doesn't really cover what I believe, what I value. So I said, so write down the word that would. And I ended up with 48 words of core values that include all the core values of the men who stayed out and what they valued, and the core values of the men who came back. And whenever I do the core values, they will never pick the core values that bring them back to prison, but they'll always pick the core values that the men who had to stay out, but they always articulate the core values that are in the cards that were the ones they said that brought them back. So if you start to get this pattern of consistency, these keep me out and these bring me back, I go, maybe this is it. And so it's been really fun trying to identify how do I get to the root of those core values that are unnamed by the brain, and to be able to articulate them and get them named by our sense of self so that we can talk about them.
Core values sound to me like they're really powerful for people to be able to name. Is that the key to the whole thing, is knowing what these things are called?
Yep, that's the key to it, to being able to name it. So I have like 4 core values in my deck that would be compassion, empathy, forgiveness. And so I like to have a texture of the same thought pattern, and then they'll pick all 4 of them. And when it's over with, they have to pick the one they value the most. And so just having it to be core means that's what drives your life. Otherwise, you might have a list.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me give you a really good example. So this was the way I saw it. A guy had a core value of family. He had a core value of a job. He had a core value of money. And he had a core value of getting high. And then he liked to have sex with other people. And so he didn't see a problem. And I thought, well, let's talk about it. So he wants to have a family, and he wants to have multiple sexual partners. And I said, so how could that happen in his life? So he doesn't see the contradiction. The reason he doesn't is because he steps out of the relationship and into the belief system that I can have multiple partners. Then when he's done with that partner or that experience, he steps back into the relationship, and he doesn't see those as driving factors to a direction and having conflict. And it's been so powerful for me to see, if you have a job and you have family and you have money as a core value, you may work way too long at your job to make more money that destroys your family. So unhealthy or out of sync core values are chaos builders. Chaos builders are the kinds of things that put you back in prison, put you in the hospital, take your health away. And so I really want to focus on how do we identify core values that keep us healthy, give us what we want in life, and keep us chaos-free. And then out of that chaos-free, we can begin to work towards something that's greater than ourselves. You can never work towards something greater than yourself if there's chaos in your life.
Because the chaos is going to rule.
You're going to have to put out fires every day of the week.
Yeah. So once somebody's figured out all their core values, narrowed it down to this list of 4 or 5,
Yep.
what do you do to keep them on track? They go out with these core values, but they come back with something else. How do they stay on track?
So when you think about having 4 or 5 core values, then you ask yourself, what kind of a person does that make me in the community? So you could actually reverse it and say, is this the kind of person I want to be? And if this is the kind of person I want to be, now this is really huge, because we don't know how to act the way we want to be if these are our core values. We know better how to act if we want to have multiple partners, get high, get drunk, instant gratification. We don't do that. So I ask them in prison, you can't wait till you get out of prison you have to start practicing compassion, wellness, transparency, whatever it might be, in prison. If you don't practice it in prison, you'll never live it outside of prison. It'll be too late to start practicing.
And so if we remove prison from this whole thing and just talk about domestic partnerships,
Yep.
what changes? What does anything change in how you go about your keeping your core values?
Right. So that's a really good question, because relationships, most of the stuff that we learn in our society is pretty much me, and more. And so when you think about getting into a relationship, it's difficult to think of another person coming into your life and adding quality to it. It's much easier, at least for many of the guys I spoke to, for someone to come into your life and then you use them. And if you use another person, then the relationship has a cancer in it. And then you get into the habit of them being your slave or your servant, or you're using them or whatever role they have. And then they usually reject it, or else they want you to be their toy. And so it's really difficult for me to have men who have been raised where the men do this, the man makes the money, the man makes the decisions, the woman is more domestic. For them to value a partner as an equal, and to be as intelligent, and to be able to make good decisions and to make good contributions to the relationship, is a huge change in core values. So,
how does a person go into a relationship? Let's say they figured out their core values. What do they have to do in a relationship to keep those steady?
So let me answer a different question.
Okay.
So when I got into my relationship, when I got out of prison, the first thing I did was try to identify what her core values were. Because if her core values is different than mine, we're going to clash a lot. And so, so now to come back to your question, the thing I think is the most powerful, and people just don't hear it, is that if you're going to be in a relationship and you want to have good core values, you've got to practice them. Practice, practice, practice. And what happens with practice is that if you practice riding a bicycle, you get to do it. Now you have the neurological landscape that helps you do that, riding the bicycle. 5 years later, you can get on a bicycle and the brain remembers and you can do it.
Yep.
So if you're in a relationship and you're looking for the core values and the kind of man or woman you want to be in that relationship, you have to practice it so the neurological landscape develops that makes it a habit. That's the difference between me and most cognitive behavioral programs. They think if you change the thinking, you'll change the behavior. That is absolutely true. But the thinking will only be in place as long as you have the ability to inhibit a core value that's driving different thinking. So let me give you an example. I could say that I really don't like really tall people.
Okay.
And so I can inhibit my behavior and language when I see a tall person. But if I have a drink, I get a little weak and I start to say things about tall people. And so it's those core values that we have in the back of our minds, or kind of like in the secondary area, that we keep inhibited, that are really our core values, that will overrule all the ones that are coming out and building a good relationship. So if I want to get high, have multiple partners, and I'm in a relationship, I can stay out of other relationships for a while, but I'll eventually begin to think that variety is more important and better than just one partner. That I can't keep inhibited forever. I can think it and I can act it, but it'll eventually be overruled by the belief that I need multiple partners.
So it comes back to finding your core values, practice, practice, practice.
Yep, that's what it comes down to. So decide what kind of a person do I want to be. What kind of a person I want to be will determine what you're going to do. What you're going to do will determine what you're going to have. And then you've got to ask yourself the question, is this the kind of life that I'd be happy with?